Imagine waking up to water, not a little water, water everywhere. Your street is gone, your neighbors' homes are gone. The entire city, for hundreds of miles in every direction, is underwater. 4 million people died. Most of them drowned. Others starved. Disease took the rest. This happened in 1931 in China, and you've probably never heard about it. Today, I'm showing you the deadliest natural disaster in human history. The one that killed more people than World War I. The one that's been almost completely forgotten. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why this matters. Even now, almost a century later. Let me paint the picture for you. China in 1931 was already falling apart. The country had just ended thousands of years of imperial rule. The last emperor abdicated in 1912. What followed was chaos. Warlords controlled different regions. The nationalist government, led by Chiang Kai-shek, was fighting communist forces. Civil war was brewing. The economy was broken. Most people, about 80% of China's 400 million population, were farmers. Poor farmers. They lived along 3 massive river systems, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the Huai River. These rivers were everything. They provided water for crops, transportation, fish, life itself, but they were also deadly. Here's what you need to understand. These rivers flooded regularly, every few years, sometimes every year. Chinese farmers built their lives around this cycle. They knew the risks. But 1931 was different. Winter, 1930-1931. The setup. The disaster actually started in winter. Central and southern China got heavy snowfall, more than usual. The snowpack in the mountains was massive. Then spring came. The snow melted fast. At the same time, the winter had been unusually dry in some areas. When spring rain started in April 1931, the ground couldn't absorb the water. It was either frozen or too dry and hard. The water had nowhere to go except into the rivers. Summer 1931, the perfect storm. Between July and August 1931, China experienced extraordinary rainfall. The China Meteorological Administration's records show that some areas received their entire annual rainfall in just 2 months. Nanjing, the capital at the time, recorded precipitation levels 3 to 4 times above normal. 7 cyclones hit the region between July and November. 7. That's not normal. Usually the region might see 2 or 3 in a season. Think about it this way. Imagine if your city got a year's worth of rain in 2 months, and during those 2 months, 7 major storms hit. Where does all that water go? Into rivers that were already swollen from snowmelt. The levees couldn't hold. July 1931, the breaking point. On July 25, 1931, the Yangtze River burst its banks near Wuhan. Wuhan is a major city in central China. Today it has over 11 million people. In 1931, it had about 1 million. The water rose so fast that people didn't have time to evacuate. One survivor account, documented by the International Red Cross, described waking up to water already at chest level inside their home. By afternoon, they were on their roof. By evening, the roof was gone. The Yangtze wasn't the only problem. The Yellow River, called China's Sorrow because it flooded so often, broke through its levees in multiple places. The Huai River did the same. By August, these 3 river systems had created an inland sea covering 87,000 square miles. That's an area roughly the size of Kansas. Underwater, in a country where most people lived at subsistence level, with no warning systems, no evacuation plans, no infrastructure to handle a disaster of this scale. What drowning looked like. Let me be clear about what happened. People drowned in their homes, in their fields, on roads trying to escape. Entire villages vanished, not damaged, vanished. The water washed away homes made of wood and mud brick. It swept away crops, livestock, trees. When the water receded months later, there was nothing left, just mud and bodies. The death toll from drowning alone is estimated between 145,000 and 400,000 people in the first weeks. But drowning was just the beginning. The real killer, what came after, here's where it gets worse. After the initial flooding, about 50 million people were displaced. Think about that number, 50 million. That's more than the entire population of Spain today. These people had no homes, no food, no clean water. The floods destroyed the summer harvest. Then the fields stayed underwater for months, so there was no fall planting, no winter crops. Famine came next. The International Red Cross, which sent teams to China in late 1931, documented mass starvation. People ate tree bark, they ate grass, they ate the few animals that survived. Then disease hit. Cholera, typhus, dysentery, malaria. When you have millions of people living in unsanitary conditions, drinking contaminated water with no medical care, disease spreads like wildfire. The Red Cross reported that in some refugee camps, the death rate reached 5% per day. Per day? That means in a camp of 1,000 people, 50 would die every single day. Death toll. How bad was it really? Here is where we need to be honest about what we know and what we done tea. The exact death toll from the 1931 floods will never be known. Different sources give different numbers. Conservative estimates, 1 million dead. International Red Cross estimate, 1932, 2 million dead. Chinese government records, 3.7 million dead. Some historians argue it could be as high as 4 million. Why the huge range? China in 1931 didn't have comprehensive census data. Rural areas weren't well documented. The government was dealing with civil war and couldn't conduct proper surveys. Many bodies were never recovered. Entire families died with no one left to report them missing. But even the lowest estimate, 1 million, makes this the deadliest natural disaster in recorded history. For comparison, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami killed 230,000 people. The 2010 Haiti earthquake killed 316,000 people. Hurricane Katrina killed 1,133 people. The 1931 floods killed more people than all of these combined, multiplied several times over. Real stories from survivors. I want you to hear what this actually looked like. These are documented accounts from Red Cross workers and journalists who were there. One American missionary, writing from Nanjing, described seeing bodies floating down the Yangtze for weeks. So many bodies that boats couldn't navigate the river without hitting them. A British journalist reported visiting a refugee camp outside Wuhan, where 20,000 people were living in conditions he described as worse than any battlefield I witnessed in the Great War. Chinese survivors told stories of families splitting up, each person trying to save themselves. Children separated from parents and never reunited. Elderly people left behind because they couldn't walk fast enough. One account that stayed with me. A woman found her neighbor floating past on a wooden door, holding a baby above the water. The baby was already dead. The woman had drowned trying to keep it dry. That's what we're talking about. Not statistics. People. Mothers, fathers, children. Farmers who'd lived their entire lives in one village. Gone. Economic devastation. The floods destroyed China's agricultural heartland. The Yangtze River Valley produced about 40% of China's rice. All of that was wiped out for at least 2 growing seasons. The economic damage was estimated at $1.4 billion in 1931 dollars. That's equivalent to about $25 billion today. But that number doesn't capture the real impact. China's economy was already fragile. This pushed it over the edge. It contributed to the political instability that led to World War II in Asia just 6 years later. The Chinese government's response was inadequate. That's not a criticism so much as a fact. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government was fighting a civil war. Resources were limited. The government couldn't reach many affected areas because roads and railways were destroyed. They did what they could. They set up refugee camps. They tried to distribute food. But the scale of the disaster overwhelmed any response. The International Red Cross stepped in. They were the main source of organized relief. Red Cross teams from multiple countries arrived in China by September 1931. They brought food, medicine, and engineers to help repair levees. They set up medical stations and vaccination programs to combat disease. But even the Red Cross couldn't reach everyone. The affected area was too large. The needs were too great. By their own estimates, the Red Cross was able to provide meaningful help to only about 10% of the affected population. Here's what China did afterward. The government realized the flood control systems were completely inadequate. The levees that existed were poorly maintained and too weak. In the 1930s and 1940s, despite ongoing war and political upheaval, China began investing in better flood control, reinforcing and raising levees, creating flood diversion areas where water could be deliberately channeled during high water events, building drainage systems. After 1949, when the communist government took power, they made flood control a national priority. They built major dams on all three river systems. The Three Gorges Dam, completed in 2006, is the world's largest hydroelectric dam. One of its primary purposes is flood control on the Yangtze. Has it worked? Yes and no. The Yangtze River Valley still floods. In 2020, there was severe flooding that displaced millions of people, but the death toll was under 300 people. That's tragic, but it's not 1931. Modern early warning systems, better infrastructure, and the ability to evacuate populations have made a massive difference. Lesson: engineering and preparation can't prevent natural disasters, but they can dramatically reduce the human cost. Now let me tell you why you've probably never heard about this. Reason 1. Timing and geography. The 1931 floods happened in China, at a time when China was isolated from much of the Western world. Communication was limited. Few Western journalists were in the affected areas. The disaster got some international coverage, but not much. Western newspapers in 1931 were focused on the Great Depression, which was devastating economies worldwide. A humanitarian crisis in rural China just wasn't a priority for Western media. Reason 2. What came next? After 1931, China descended into even worse chaos. In 1937, Japan invaded China. World War II in Asia began. Millions more died. The 1931 floods became just one tragedy among many. Then, in 1949, the Communist Party won the Chinese Civil War. China became isolated again. For decades, Western historians had limited access to Chinese archives and records. By the time China began opening up in the 1980s, the 1931 floods were ancient history. There were more recent disasters to study. Reason 3. The nature of the disaster. Here's something I've noticed. We remember sudden, dramatic disasters. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. They happen fast. They're visually dramatic. They make for compelling news coverage. Floods, especially slow-moving floods that lead to famine and disease, don't have the same impact on collective memory. The 1931 disaster killed most of its victims over months, not minutes. That makes it harder to conceptualize, harder to tell as a story, less memorable. Reason 4. Language barriers. Most of the documentation about the 1931 floods is in Chinese. Western historians didn't translate or study these records until relatively recently. The most comprehensive English-language book on the disaster, The Great Flood of 1931 by Courtney, wasn't published until 2018. That's 87 years after the event. Why it matters that we forgot. Here's why this bugs me. When we forget disasters like this, we lose important lessons. The 1931 floods were caused by a combination of natural factors and human decisions. Poor land management, inadequate infrastructure, deforestation in watersheds, political instability that prevented effective response. These are all factors that still cause disasters today. Climate change is making extreme weather events more common. Floods are getting worse in many parts of the world. If we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. The 1931 floods show us what happens when a natural disaster hits a vulnerable population with inadequate preparation. That's a lesson we need to remember. So here's what I want you to take away from this. The 1931 China floods killed between 1 and 4 million people. That makes it the deadliest natural disaster in recorded human history. It happened because of extreme weather, poor infrastructure, and a government unable to respond effectively. The human cost was staggering. Millions dead, tens of millions displaced, an entire economy devastated. China learned from it. They built better flood controls. They invested in early warning systems. They improved their ability to respond to disasters. And yet most of us have never heard about it. That tells us something important about how we remember history. We remember what's convenient, what fits our narratives, what happens in places we pay attention to. But forgetting disasters doesn't make them less real. It just makes us less prepared for the next one. Climate scientists predict that extreme weather events like the 1931 floods will become more common as global temperatures rise. We have better technology now, better communication, better infrastructure. But we also have more people living in vulnerable areas. The question is, will we learn from 1931? Or will we wait for the next disaster to teach us the same lessons all over again? If this video made you think differently about natural disasters in history, do me a favor and hit the like button. It helps more people see content like this. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into forgotten history. I'm covering stories that matter but don't get told, and share this video. Seriously, send it to someone who loves history, or someone who works in disaster management, or just someone who should know about this. Drop a comment and tell me, had you heard about the 1931 floods before watching this? What other forgotten disasters should I cover? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.